Hello, I'm Henry Mack, and welcome to this month's Viewpoint. Brittany Maynard, a 29-year-old, chose to die last month after receiving a diagnosis of terminal brain cancer. She wished to die on her own terms, using the pills prescribed to her by her physicians, rather than by the cancer itself. This case has raised interesting questions about death and what our own deaths should look like. In certain cases, should we be permitted to opt for physician-assisted suicide? Currently, 5 states permit the practice. Joining me to discuss are Michael Herbert, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Broward College, Raul Del Vasco, a retired Doctor of Nephrology at Baptist Health, Director of Clinical Ethics at the University of Miami Ethics Program, and the Chair of the Baptist Health Bioethics Committee. Mary Carter Warren, Associate Professor at the School of Theology and Ministry of St. Thomas University, and Raymond Ward, Assistant Professor of Theological Ethics and Director of Ministerial Formation at Barry University. Welcome all to the program. This case has garnered a lot of attention, a lot of emotions. People are for, people are opposed, whether or not she should have done this. Let's start with that question. Should she have done this? Morally speaking, ethically speaking, this is sort of a hard issue to unpack. Wrestling with the question of death and how we should approach death is in itself a very provocative and emotional one itself. But Mary, could you provide some perspective on whether or not Brittany should have done this? Was there a more compassionate way, perhaps, or a more pastoral or better way to approach this?
Yeah, I think the question is a should. I mean, I don't presume to be able to judge whether she should have been able to do that or not. I think that I think life is the most important value we have. So I would say the process that allowed for her to do that is not a process that helps us as a society look at the question of suffering.
Why doesn't it help us as society?
Because it's a highly individual decision that makes it look like you don't need community, that you're not responsible to the rest of the community. And I think we are. I think that each of us is not an autonomous cog that decides life and death issues all by themselves. And so I think there's a moral value in the way that we comport our life and our death.
I'm interested to understand how physician-assisted suicide, or suicide in general, is an affront to the community that we live in, and on that basis makes it sort of reprehensible.
I think hope is a primary human value, and I think when you just, throughout suicide in general, I think it says to the community, life is not worth living, the community is not enough, there's no hope, there's no other way to approach this, there's no compassion that would make this more livable, there's no love that's conquerable for this suffering. I think that the lack of hope, the lack of belief that things could be different or might be different given the community, and I think it's a primary religious value to hope that that a better life is possible. That a better death is possible.
Mm-hmm. What would you say in reply to that, Michael?
I share her belief that it's not for us to judge whether she should have done it or not, but I do believe that she should have been able to make the choice for herself. She's the one with this, or she's the one that had this terrible disease, and her brain is the one that was going to deteriorate. So she was able to make an informed decision on the kind of life and death she'd like to experience, and I think that we should do what we can to help her and others who are suffering like that to make the best decision as they see fit.
Full disclosure, I work at Broward College with Michael. This is a complicated case for many reasons. Doctor, I was wondering if you can also weigh in on the topic of approaching death and being so burdened by the progressive pain that she might have encountered, and whether or not this was a good thing.
Yeah, when you see patients with the tumor that she had in the brain, and the way that they die, you can understand why she chose that. And I think, at least from what I could read, she had the support of her family, her husband. So the community, her private community was supportive of her. When we take this out of the private community and we look at society in itself and we say, hey, we don't have to worry about having the conditions to support you when you're sick and suffering, and it will be easier for you to die. That's the concern that I have, like you do. But I think in her case, it seems like she did that work, and it was the right decision for her. And she actually moved to a place where she could make it legal, which is another step that is difficult to do. And I think that she did the right thing at the time that she did it.
I mean, we should note that the suffering that she was going through was mainly emotional suffering at that point, right? That she was very upset by the lack of control that she was having over her own thoughts, she was having several seizures a day towards the end. That, as far as I understood, it was mainly emotional pain and not physical pain. That
I think she was having major seizures as well, and the prospect of this, as this particular tumor, could have made her immune to morphine and successful palliative care at the end anyways as well.
Well, but the thing to be, well, if she has really a lot of seizures, and that's a really dramatic thing to see, and for the family and their husband and the people that are with her, that she may not want to have people see her in that state. And at the end, they won't be able to control these issues. They will have to do things that are put in an unconscious state to control this issue, and maybe she felt that was too much to accept. I've had patients that I know of, patients and friends that had that kind of tumor. They fought until the end, the very end, regardless of what, because they wanted to have those few moments with people that they enjoy being with.
Yeah, what makes this case, I think, so tragic, she was so young, 29, aggressive brain cancer, not wanting, again, her family to watch her die in pain. They moved to Oregon, which permits physician-assisted suicide, and she took advantage of the ability to end her own life in the way that she saw fit. So this has prompted a lot of movements around the country. Right to die movements, death with dignity movements. What do you think about this? Is this good for culture, as Mary had mentioned? Should we create laws which permit this? Yes, you may personally believe otherwise, that this shouldn't happen, but as Michael said, maybe we should at least have the option of controlling the way we die.
I think we might all agree that having a conversation about this is really good. That this is one issue that is so often not talked about until very inopportune times. So the fact that this prompted national conversation around this, I think, is actually a very good thing. I mean, it's not a new discussion, right? This is clearly something that's been going on for a long time. But the fact that she's so young, too, and that she used social media to explain her decision to the world, I think puts us in a really unique situation to have a conversation about this.
So what do you think? Like, what do you think we should do?
I guess I would begin with first saying that it's legitimate to ask whether a person's decision to end their own life is the right decision or not. And I think posing the question that way opens up possibilities. Can a person make a mistake in the decisions that they make about their own life? Because I think that'll help bridge the gap between saying it's completely your decision, whatever you decide is fine by me, I don't get to say anything, and no, I'm going to have this set of rules that is going to say objectively what's right or wrong. It, I hope, could open room for discussing with somebody, why did you decide this? What were your reasons for doing this? And can I get on board? Can I agree with your reasons for doing this?
Aren't we conceding the debate, though? Like, why would you, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to inform the law, then. Should we permit this as a matter of law within each state, that we should be given this opportunity for physicians to give us medication that would, at our own volition, end our lives in the way that we want to? I mean, do you see this as the responsibility of physicians to do this, and should we have laws that permit this?
No, I don't think that's the responsibility of physicians to do that, but I think that at this moment, in the way that we practice medicine in the United States, you need to have a really well-developed palliative care program and hospice, really doing their job well, to be able to say that I would support a law that will permit physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia. I think that we are way too early to do that. But we know that even in places like in Oregon, where they have good hospice programs and palliative care, there is a percentage of people there that have continuous suffering and pain that they cannot control, and they are using physician-assisted suicide to take care of that. So I think that we still have to do a lot of work before I would say that I would favor that.
The American Medical Association, in its bylaws 2.21, quote, euthanasia is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer, and it would be difficult or impossible to control and would pose serious social risks, end quote, from the AMA.
Well, the AMA has its members, and this was discussed, and there were other members that felt differently. I think that physicians' function is not only prolonging life, but relieve suffering and make the patient have a better life.
So what happens when the two come in conflict, I guess,
well,
right?
then you have to look at it in a particular. You know, what is about this patient that I know well for having taken care of him or her for many years, and I have a good connection with them and a doctor-patient relationship that I will be able to do it.
But of course, that portends a good doctor-patient relationship, which doesn't really exist in American healthcare,
which
right?
is really going the opposite way.
I mean, I think you couldn't possibly assume that would be true.
The way that we are going, even with healthcare reform, I'm very concerned that we have the environment that will allow to have this type of law and protect patients.
Back to the morality of the whole thing. Do you buy the argument that to kill oneself or to have a physician assist in one's suicide is to treat oneself as a means rather than an end, and is therefore morally impermissible, and this shouldn't be permitted? We shouldn't even be left up to our own decisions in this? Is that a legitimate argument?
No, I would say no.
Why?
I think that we can value ourselves even if we choose to die sooner than later. I don't believe we have any reason to believe that Brittany Maynard didn't fully respect herself or the importance of her decision. She saw that her life was being destroyed as it was being taken from her, and she wanted to avoid anxiety, depression, dementia possibly, terrible things that none of us would want to experience. And I don't think that she's using herself just as some sort of tool by choosing to avoid utter agony.
Go ahead.
No, I think the only question that I've had about this case is that she may not be using herself as a tool, but some other people may use herself as a tool of proposing and going forward with physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. And that's a concern. But if she wants to do that, an activist, and take this, that's fine. But I have concern, well, like Terry Schiavo was. There were different points of view there that were doing things independent of Terry Schiavo herself. And being used then.
Can you clarify who Terry Schiavo is, just for our viewers?
Yes, Terry Schiavo was a patient that was in a persistent vegetative state, and that there was some evidence that she didn't want to be in that state. And after they went for several years trying to see if she would improve and didn't improve, her husband wanted to stop the nutrition and hydration and any type of treatment so she would die, following her desires. And this was a tug of war between people who felt that being handicapped is what made people want her to stop eating and die.
Right.
And I think that she was used by that group in that sense. And
the human condition is so complex, and wrestling with death is a difficult situation. It's very emotional, and in some ways it's very spiritual to a lot of people. Is there value in suffering? Should we approach death in light of some of the religious traditions? I was wondering if you could shed light on the value of suffering, and if there is any, Mary.
Well, I think
we should approach death is in itself a very provocative and emotional one itself. But Mary, could you provide some perspective on whether or not Brittany should have done this? Was there a more compassionate way, perhaps, or a more pastoral or better way to approach this?
Yeah, I think the question is a should. I mean, I don't presume to be able to judge whether she should have been able to do that or not. I think that I think life is the most important value we have. So I would say the process that allowed for her to do that is not a process that helps us as a society look at the question of suffering.
Why doesn't it help us as society?
Because it's a highly individual decision that makes it look like you don't need community, that you're not responsible to the rest of the community. And I think we are. I think that each of us is not an autonomous cog that decides life and death issues all by themselves. And so I think there's a moral value in the way that we...
Currently, 5 states permit the practice. Joining me to discuss are Michael Herbert, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Broward College, Raul Del Vasco, a retired Doctor of Nephrology at Baptist Health, Director of Clinical Ethics at the University of Miami Ethics Program, and the Chair of the Baptist Health Bioethics Committee. Mary Carter Warren, Associate Professor at the School of Theology and Ministry of St. Thomas University, and Raymond Ward, Assistant Professor of Theological Ethics and Director of Ministerial Formation at Barry University. Welcome all to the program. This case has garnered a lot of attention, a lot of emotions. People are for, people are opposed, whether or not she should have done this. Let's start with that question. Should she have done this? Morally speaking, ethically speaking, this is sort of a hard issue to unpack. Wrestling with the question of death and how we... Hello, I'm Henry Mack, and welcome to this month's Viewpoint. Brittany Maynard, a 29-year-old, chose to die last month after receiving a diagnosis of terminal brain cancer. She wished to die on her own terms using the pills prescribed to her by her physicians rather than by the cancer itself. This case has raised interesting questions about death and what our own deaths should look like. In certain cases, should we be permitted to opt for physician-assisted suicide?